Thank you, Joe. My name is Soares. I'm Managing Director of the Procure Group. We are a supply chain strategy, procurement excellence, and operations excellence boutique consulting firm based out of Atlanta. I'm going to be talking today about procurement excellence. It's a topic that I wanted to address because there's a little bit of confusion about exactly what procurement excellence is. Just curious as to did anyone attend the webinar I had about 3 weeks ago on communicating your supply chain initiatives to the C-suite? I don't know if you did or not, but okay. There are going to be some concepts that I introduced there, which I'll introduce in this presentation as well. We'll try to get through that as best as we possibly can. But our agenda will be to talk about what is procurement excellence and how people see it today, and how we at the Procure Group understand it to be, how it's applied in real-world settings, how you might see it in the procurement organization, what the value is of having a procurement organization that is performing at its maximum, and then some business cases so you can see how it's actually being done in real life, and of course where you might want to begin with procurement excellence in your own organization. So currently, the way a procurement organization is typically measured is through a set of capabilities that they possess against several different dimensions. And so we'll begin with the operating model capabilities on the left-hand side. Every company has an operating model. It's kind of the people, process, and technology framework that you may have heard of. And it applies to both companies and organizations as well. So it will apply to your procurement organization, your procurement strategy organization. And it has typically a governance and organizational aspect to it, strategic sourcing, a very important process, as you just heard from Mark talking about contract manufacturing and all of the things that you have to go through to select a contract manufacturer. That's done through a strategic sourcing process. We have SRM, supplier relationship management, contract management, analytics. Procure to pay is another very important process. It's essentially the buying process. It's where people out in the organization actually are buying whatever that it is that they need. And then the technology that kind of supports it. And each one of these operating model capabilities will have some sort of set of performance components. In this case, I picked the governance and organization. There are 4 different components to it: strategy, management, process, and talent. Strategy, for example, is your procurement strategy aligned with your business strategy, right? If it's not, then you probably won't score well, and if it is, then you'll score very well. We have in our organization about 30 to 40 questions that we'll ask, but some of these other consulting firms will have as much as 300 different essentially elements that they'll be scoring your organization against, right? So it can get pretty obtuse and intrusive. But we try not to be that critical, really. But ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to get evaluated against some sort of maturity curve. So, on the far end, you have essentially what is lagging. It means basically there's no process that exists. And then as you are sort of maturing up the curve, you may be in an achieving level where you have processes that exist. You're seeing some benefits from it. But maybe there's some gaps that you need to close, or there's some upside still available to you. And then, of course, on the far right of the maturity curve, you are at the mastery level, right? This is kind of best in class. You're establishing best in class levels of performance. Here, your organization is, their policies and procedures are prolific. Even outside of procurement, there's widespread adoption and compliance with the rules. And so that will kind of indicate that the organization is at a high level of procurement excellence. But after you go through all of this, essentially what we're just trying to understand is, where are you from your performance perspective? And are you at your maximum? Now, I like to use the cost curve to sort of illustrate this. And I know this may be a little bit confusing. I'll try to get through it. But cost curves are very commonly used in manufacturing, and I think they should be more commonly used in high-end strategy functions like procurement. But essentially what it says is that you are at your max profitability when your price, or the return you're getting in the case of procurement, is equal to the marginal cost. And the marginal cost is only saying the cost to produce your next unit. of whatever it is. There are other elements of the cost curve, like the total cost, which is essentially your fixed plus your variable. The reason the marginal cost is a little bit different is due to the law of diminishing returns. What that really means is once you've started reaching your max capacity here, then you start throwing more resources. You maybe are paying a little bit more overtime. You're adding shifts during the weekend to be able to produce that additional piece of unit, driving your costs up beyond what a normal variable cost might be. So some things to keep in mind is in your procurement organization right now, there is a max profitability somewhere. You should try to know and understand what your fixed costs are and what your variable costs are. And that might be obviously the space that you occupy, as well as the management overhead, your VP of procurement, your category managers. It could be the underlying technology you're using, at least sort of the initial sort of base package. Some variable costs might be additional seats that you have. Consulting is a variable cost. Oftentimes you'll have a slew of categories or commodities that you need to source. It could take you 3 to 5 years with your existing workforce, and so you may bring in a consulting firm like ours to help you sort of work that backlog down, bring those savings into this year, and then when all that is over, it will go away. So that's essentially another form of variable cost. Also, what's important is to know and understand how to measure returns, right? And what your returns are. So procurement's often measured on how much have you saved. You were paying $10 for a unit and now you're paying $9, right? But that's really not the whole picture. We call it the total cost of ownership, and it includes things like how well does something perform on a line. If you buy a product, a raw material, for cheaper, which is great, but then it's causing issues on your line and closing it down, well then you're now incurring costs elsewhere. You may buy a piece of equipment that lasts 7 years versus 5 years. It has more or less maintenance. Even aspects like what's the cost to purchase or what's the cost to pay an invoice are taken into account when you're looking at the total cost of ownership, okay? So try to have a very good understanding of what that is and build your own cost model to see what your max profitability is, okay? Now, something that's very important to understand, once you're here, you cannot increase your profitability unless you shift the curves, unless you're somehow able to get greater returns from your existing procurement organization, or you're able to shift the marginal cost curve down, okay? Now, one of the ways you can do this, I think the most effective way to do this is by using procurement excellence methodologies, right? So, what is procurement excellence? Essentially, it's where your procurement strategy meets operations excellence. And if you were part of, listened to the webinar, you might have seen this. I had a lot more detail behind it. Operations excellence is about eliminating waste by focusing on those things that the customer wants, that will delight the customer. And procurement strategy is really about having a planned approach to effectively purchasing your goods and materials that your organization needs to survive, right? From the operations excellence, I mean, this is lean, right? This is the 8 forms of waste. This is customer and business value add, and a slew of different tools, which unfortunately we're just not going to be able to get into. But it's taking those tools, applying it into a high-value strategy organization like the procurement organization, a shared services organization, and being able to optimize your efficiency. So the way we've defined it is really designing a supply strategy that most effectively achieves business goals with the greatest return on investments. Now, you can use all of these different operational excellence tools and techniques in the procurement organization. And I have over here the operating model elements, which is what we use at the Procure Group. Some might break some of these out and have a few more, but we're very comfortable with what this is. And I have the 8 forms of waste, which again, if you attended the webinar, I went into a little bit more of what that is, but you can look this up. This isn't proprietary. It's very commonly understood to be the 8 forms of waste. You know it by the acronym TIM-R-WOOD. and each letter representing a type of waste that you can kind of eliminate, right? So when we look at, for example, your governance and organizational structure, what are you looking for from a lean perspective, right? Lean, just pause a little bit here. I mean, it's based out of the Toyota production manufacturing system, right? And it's been a hardcore manufacturing type of methodology. It's had some difficulty getting adopted into business line services like this, but it's just more of a translation issue than anything else. And I wanted to kind of illustrate this. When we talk about governance structures, we can say, is your procurement strategy aligned with the business strategy? And if it's not, what most likely is going to happen is you're going to have a lot of defects. You're going to have issues that need to be resolved. You're going to have to put resources against those issues so that you can kind of get back on track. Okay, so it is a form of defects that are generated by not having a proper alignment with your strategies, right? Likewise, you have a procurement organization, and the resources that are in those organizations can be optimized. If you have a manager doing an associate piece of work, or directors doing manager's work, VP doing director's work, your resources are not being optimized. So this is a way to look at that and say, okay, who do we really need to have doing what work so that each one is contributing the max amount of value to the organization that they can. A lot of that is kind of pushing that work down the best extent possible and raising the strategy pieces up, right? From the strategic sourcing process, again, I'm really glad Mark was talking about it because it gives you a flavor of just how complicated that process is. It's also a long process. It takes 6 months. And in my career, I've done all of this procurement work. I've done supply chain strategy. I've done operations excellence. And I had about a 7-year hiatus before I went back into procurement. And with my new kind of lean lens, this is the process that got me thinking about how poorly it's actually done today. There are too many things that go into an RFP process. We have too many vendors who participate. It takes too long to get the benefits that you want from it. And you can see this by the amount of wait time that's in there between different pieces of value add that's built to sort of put together an RFP, inventory in the form of data, reports, even number of RFPs that you might have. And if you are able to see this waste, then you're able to address it much more efficiently, right? And the sooner you can get savings, the better off you are. And that's what this is about. Over processing RFPs, again, kind of, we have 20 vendors in this process. We know 10 are not going to make it, but we include them anyways because we think we're going to get, a lower price. Well, reality is it's 10 additional conversations. It's 10 additional sets of questions you have to answer. You're most likely going to get a really good price anyways. And your best performers are probably not going to give you your lowest price anyways. And so you're not going to go for it, right? So what's the use? It's just wasting your time. It's adding more work into the process. I'll go down to procure to pay because it is sort of, the other really big process in a procurement organization or any other organization. Here you'll see inventory and approval processes. I mean, sometimes you have 5 different sets of approvals. There's a lot of wait in between. You may or may not have contracts, and you may or may not even be buying off of the contract, right? So these are just different forms of waste that you could be, if you were to correct, get a better return for the exact same sort of investment dollar, all right? So I wanted to put a value to what all of this meant, right? And so I know this is a bit of a busy chart. I'll try to get through it as best as I can. I'll start with the procurement benchmark. This is from the Hackett Group from 2015, and what it says is that the cost of procurement as a percent of revenue essentially is the same between a world-class and all the rest. A world-class procurement organization and all the rest, right? World-class being the average of the top quartile, all the rest being the average of the bottom 3 quartiles, right? But the return is almost double. So I put in here $1 billion company in revenue so we can see sort of what that means in dollar values. As you can see, the actual cost of the procurement, the organization itself, as well as people outside of the organization in the business who spends time doing procurement activities. That's in this number as well. Relatively the same, whether you are, world class or other, but the return is double, right? Really impressive. Now, so here we have $11.7 million, $11.8 million, right? And I'll get into sort of a few pieces of information that you'll probably need to understand this. Enterprise value, EBITDA, and the multiplier, right? So enterprise value essentially is the value of your company if someone were to come and buy it. That means they bought all the shares. They also have all the long-term and short-term debt, plus a few other things. So the enterprise value says, this is the cash you're going to get. You're going to have to pay the debt on it, but then whatever's left over is yours, okay? It is extraordinarily important. It's what, all of these publicly traded companies essentially are being measured against. The EBITDA is a profitability metric. It really tells you how well you operate the business, right? And the multiplier simply, it's a division of the enterprise value over EBITDA. Now, we have in this pro forma 25% EBITDA and a 21x multiplier. The reason is, again, if you attended the webinar, you'd see I did an analysis of the top 18 global medical devices companies. It was represented about 35% of the global market. They had a weighted average EBITDA of 24.7, so I rounded up a little bit. And they had a weighted average multiplier of 21x, okay? So that means for every dollar of contribution that you make to the EBITDA, you can multiply that by 21, and you'll get an enterprise value. So in this instance, essentially what it's saying is $12 million times 21 is going to give you $247 million in enterprise value. People don't necessarily look at things this way, but it sort of helps you illustrate how important it is to, first, for EBITDA contribution in a medical devices arena, but for your shareholders, for your bosses as well, right? But one of the pieces also that's actually, I think, even more interesting is the fact that this simple example here represents a 4.7% increase in your EBITDA margin, right? Increases in EBITDA margin grow your multiplier. Suddenly it's not 21, it's 22, 23, 24. And from just this perspective, there's data out there that suggests it's in the 40 to 50%. It contributes to 40 to 50% of what the multiplier is. So it could be a lot more than a few points. Okay? So, very valuable. So where else is this being applied today? Pennsylvania Bureau of Procurement started off with 5S. That's a tool that's used. If anyone's ever gone through Lean Six Sigma transformations and you've seen blue tape everywhere, that's 5S. Almost all of them begin with the office closet. There are lots of them, believe it or not, and there's lots of stuff in there. And so it's a good place, easy place to begin. They also did a problem-solving project. They used the fishbone diagram and the root cause analysis diagram. They identified standard work across 9 teams, and they put it all on a board so that you can walk by and see the progression of your sourcing commodities and processes happening, right? Visual is a big part of Lean, being able to quickly identify whether you're on track or not. Charité, which is a Berlin hospital, selected the endovascular stent process. They did a value stream map on it, and what they uncovered, there was 13 processes, only 2 of which were customer value added, and 5 processes that could be completely eliminated altogether. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? And this is not office supplies, it's not travel, this is very important, significant direct materials, right? They also instituted a Kanban pull system, which is very common and popular in Lean systems. And then I do like to kind of look outside the industry, outside the function for other examples. So I found Wipro, they use the Kaizen for their iterative approach to software development versus serial. I mean, if you think about this is how they make the sausage, right? That's how they do it. They changed that process. They used value stream mapping to help them identify where waste was, where inventory was, where defects were. So they reduced the number of errors and they reduced the amount of debugging that had to be done on the back end. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor for how, again, another service-oriented business, very strategic process, is using sort of a traditional manufacturing Lean methodology to help them improve their efficiencies. So where do you begin? So lots of medical devices, all the ones that I've kind of worked for, which are a little bit larger than I think many of the companies in here, have already either industrial engineers that are master black belts or lean programs themselves. And so that you can already go there and start working with that team to help you sort of begin to adopt some of those methodologies within your own procurement organizations. Otherwise, you do have to build it your own. That's expensive. It's strategic. It takes a long time. One of the things you can do sort of in the intermediary is just get your own certification. I mean, it is not a difficult thing to do, and get your yellow belt, green belt, black belt, and then ultimately master black belt, and take some of the processes that you're working on already and just begin to adopt those methodologies, right? And let it sort of speak for itself. Ultimately, you're going to want to then establish your performance objectives, be clear about what it is that you want to get out of it, communicate those expectations. Identify belt projects, right? You can use a hypothesis-based approach, something I talked about at the webinar, but also just simple brainstorming techniques to identify what you think needs to be worked on. And then finally, walk the process. It's called Gemba walk, but I didn't want to put that up there. But you probably already can see where things are sort of broken down and can use some attention, right? Develop your roadmap, put all of these projects, look at what you think the returns are going to be, sequence them, trying to get the most return as soon as possible. Some are really big, take longer, cost more, but need to be done. You might, stage those accordingly. And then just go ahead and do it. Take the first step. Implement. The MAIC is define, measure, analyze, implement, control. It's the process that's used in Lean. It's also representative of a lot of other consulting processes who might take a hypothesis-based approach, assessment, road mapping, and then implementation. So I think I might be over my time, but I'm more than happy to take questions.
No, you got a couple of minutes there, Carlos.
Do I? Okay.
Yes, you do.
It says 0 here, so.
Oh, don't trust that. My one question for you is this. When it comes to operational excellence, that's such a big category, so many things you can be excellent at. What one thing would you advise a medical device person in procurement and in supply chain to really focus on and to drive home its importance to the C-suite?
The one thing is to understand how these benefits roll up into enterprise value. I mean, that is probably the single most important thing you can do. You're absolutely right. It is a huge thing. Operations excellence is a big thing. It's a transformation, and it's not done in a day. So pick something that you think you can handle, right, and demonstrate a success really early on. And that's probably going to be your best bet to be able to do the next thing, grow your capabilities, and ultimately, really drive the culture of Lean into your organization.
Solid answer. Thank you, Carlos.
All right.
Let's hear for Carlos Soares.
Thank you.